Before I introduce Scott, I'm passionate about this customer. This is a great story. So, Scott Taylor from Georgia Southern is going to speak. I met this is one of my customers. Met Georgia Southern about 2 years ago, and I have to tell you, I've been selling software for a number of years, but I had never in my life sold into higher education. And met these guys, and it was really interesting because when you start looking at the higher education landscape, there are a lot of things that are changing. The cost of tuition is going up. We all know that, right? But a lot of people don't know that over the next 5 years that kids applying to go to college is going to drop by at least 15%. And so now all these universities and colleges are competing for these students. And one thing that Georgia Southern was looking for was a way to be more competitive. I mean, they had to go out and get those students that everyone was going for, and they felt like, you know what, if we can touch these kids quicker, if we can make them feel like we're looking after their needs 24/7, 365, if we can give a better student experience so that we increase our retention rates, which is going to start raising revenue within the organization, within the university, if we can have a better way to maintain our professors, if we can come up with a way to make students feel like they're going to get a better experience here, let's focus on our education, but at the same time now free up some time to spend more time with their academic advisors. That's what this is what the university was looking for. And so from that first meeting to today, we started with one use case, which was a student campaign. This was really cool because they felt like going out to their students and starting to market to them based upon what was important to that student would start to give that student a better experience. Since then, Scott just told me before he came in, I mean, we've become strategic in their organization. I mean, we're in the fabric of what Georgia Southern University does. And so with that, I introduce Scott. Great story to tell, and really proud of this customer, and this should be a great session. Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yep, oh, absolutely. Yep.
All right. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate that. So, yeah, my name's Scott Taylor. I'm the Associate Vice President and Chief Student Experience Officer at Georgia Southern University. How many of you have ever heard of Georgia Southern University before? Okay, we've got a couple. Well, obviously the Druid team. You're like, absolutely, right? But outside of the Druid team, how many of you have heard of Georgia Southern University before? Okay, all right, some of our higher ed folks in the room, right? So not a super well-known institution relative to maybe some of our counterparts that you might think of as innovators in the industry, right? But there's a reason for that, right? So as much as I love Georgia Southern, I'm actually an alum of the institution. I did my undergrad there in international studies a long time ago, far enough back to where when I minored in Russian and Arabic. And we don't teach Russian anymore, right? Because it was a different time. But one of the things that I appreciate about Georgia Southern, it is intentionally an innovative space. And the reason is because we have to be. So, Statesboro, Georgia is a wonderful town, but I have to tell you, students typically are not tripping over themselves to move to a place like Statesboro in the same way that they might, say, want to do that in New York City, right? Or come to NYU or go to Columbia or somewhere else, right? So we have to be really intentional when we're recruiting, when we're helping students to succeed. So we largely serve students in the southeastern part of the state, and then also in the southeastern region of the United States. That's where the bulk of our students come from. So as a byproduct of that, when you look at our student demographic, right, 38% of our students are first-generation students. They are the first persons in their family to be able to attain higher education. Kind of along those same figures, there's a large number of our students who also come from the low part of the student aid index, which means historically in their educational experience, they haven't had a lot of resources around them, right? So we kind of have a higher threshold, a higher obligation to help meet those students' needs so that ultimately they can be successful. And that's why we're constantly in an innovative space. We're actually very lucky. Our president maintains a constant change environment for us, and that gives us the ability to experiment. It gives us the permission to try things and fail until we try things and succeed. So just to give you some background, that's our culture. So we are a regional comprehensive Carnegie R2 research institution. We service about 30,000 students across 4 campuses. 3 are in the state of Georgia, and little known fact, does anybody know where our 4th campus is? Wexford, Ireland. So we've opened up an international campus in Wexford, Ireland. We partnered with that city. And as a part of that, what we've done is we actually acquired an old abbey that we are converting into student housing. And the idea there, because part of this is about access, and that's why I wanted to talk about our collective learning. Part of that is giving all students the ability and the access to study abroad, because eventually, for the same price that it costs to go to school in Statesboro, Georgia, students will be able to live on campus and study for the same price overseas, right? So it's about creating that access and helping those students to have those experiences. So I want to talk to you today about how it is that Druid came to be a part of this picture, and how it is that we kind of, it ended up interdigitating with a lot of what it is that we do as an institution. So I want to talk about bots, conversational AI, and happy to be in a space with a ton of innovative people, because this is about more than just a chat bot, right? This is about more than just a particular function or technology. This is about our collective learning, right? So I think there really is this natural symbiosis, right, between higher education and Druid. But you can't talk about technology and knowledge without first talking about how it is that technology ruins everything, right? And particularly as it relates to education. So we'll do a brief history of how people always are worried that technology is going to ruin things, right? So Socrates talked about how writing was ruining the mind with laziness. Socrates didn't like it that students couldn't just remember things like academics. They had to write them down. Well, joke's on Socrates, because fortunately for him, Plato managed to write things down, and it's the only reason why we know that Socrates even said this or had this opinion, right? Flash forward to the 15th century techno panic, the horrors of the printing press. Now I have to tell you, I designed my own slides. I could not find a panicked scroll, so I had to make this. But the 15th century, we have the horrors of the printing press, and there was an abbot who said that anybody that loved the scriptures would hate the printing press, right? Because it took away this zeal and this commitment that monks had to writing the scriptures. But again, the Gutenberg press ends up creating copies of the Bible that end up getting disseminated. So these things that people sort of feared, the idea that pens, pencils, and paper, was a form of laziness. And granted, there is some learning loss, right? How many of us are really good on our calligraphy? Right? Okay, we have one. Yeah, there's always one, right? Right. All right. How many of us are good with cursive? We probably still have some cursive people in the room, right? How many people are just like, you're lucky if people can read what you write for them, right? All right. A lot of technology people in the room, so that's probably the case, right? And then, of course, comes along typewriters and ruins penmanship, right? Don't even have to tell you about the thoughts about calculators in the 1970s, word processors and the impact that had on penmanship. And then you could just go back and correct mistakes, right? Which, again, contributes to laziness rather than efficiency. Computers, right? The impact that's had. Spell check. How many of you feel like your spelling has been impacted by spell check? Right? Okay, so as somebody who's studied a couple different languages, I have to admit I am very grateful for spell check, because I want to phoneticize everything, right? English just makes no sense, All right, and then technology and learning, the internet, the impact that has, right? I think it was Thomas Friedman has The World is Flat, right? Talking about the impact that technology has had on our collective learning across the planet, the impact of smartphones, the way that has changed not just how we learn, but how we communicate, how we engage with one another, right? Crowdsourced learning, things like Chegg and these different chat groups that students engage in, where they share what previously people would have said is cheating, right? But crowdsourced learning, and now we're talking about AI. And of course, this is something that in higher education, we're going to have to grapple with. A lot of faculty, I think, are concerned about the impact that this is going to have on learning, the ability to ensure that students can compose, that they can write, that they can demonstrate and communicate linear thought. But at the end of the day, we have to understand that this is a tool that's here. We have to figure out how to leverage this to upskill students, to help them learn more and to learn better. And actually, we can use AI to delve into the data to figure out how to perform what we call comprehensive, coordinated, and differentiated care. And that's the idea that we can find out what needs students have, and we can get those students connected to the resources they need at the exact time and place when they need them. And for us, that is going to be central to the transformative power of education in really just the next 2 years, let alone 5, 10 years out. So technology doesn't ruin learning. I think everybody in this room knows that, right? It changes learning, right? And technology evolves, and so do our learners. So let's talk a little bit about today's learners. Chris alluded to the fact that there are some current contemporary challenges we have in higher education. You have some amount of public divestment from higher education. There are questions about the return on investment of a college degree. We have a group of students, this is called the demographic cliff or the enrollment cliff, where because of the financial crisis that really started late 2007 and solidified in 2008, you had people having fewer children. So there are actually fewer high school graduating seniors right now, and that trend's going to continue for some time, right? So we have these challenges in higher ed that we have to overcome. I'll tell you an interesting thing, though, because we've been in that innovative space for a while. Georgia Southern, we set a stretch goal. We had an original goal. We set a stretch goal for our enrollment for this past fall, and we said for our undergraduate students, we wanted 26,500 students, right? That was our impossible stretch goal. We hit 27,506. We beat it by more than 1,000. And the reason we've been able to do that is because we have changed the way that we engage with these students. So these students today, they're dealing with more mental health crises and issues than previous generations. Some of that is the result of experiences that they had and learning gaps in the pandemic. Emotional intelligence, building relationships, resilience. There are certainly knowledge gaps. The majority of college-going students are not where they're supposed to be in terms of English and math compared to previous generations. Critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, right? So those are challenges, but those last two right there are important. These students are a little bit different. They're digital natives, right? They are used to a seamless, personalized, integrated experience, right? You know, how many of you have Netflix, right? Lots of folks. How many of you use Amazon, right? Do you remember reading the instruction manual for those platforms? No. Why? Because there wasn't one. It was intuitive. And that's where we need to move. So we needed to find a way to engage students so that it was just intuitive to them, an experience that was absolutely intuitive. And so we developed GusBot. I'm sorry if you have, I think it's masculophobia, is the fear of mascots. It's very specific, but yeah. So this is Gus. Gus is our mascot. It's a bald eagle, and so we use Gus as the representative of our chatbot, so students can ask Gus. When we initially started Gus was not a very intelligent chatbot. He was running basically off of a series of FAQs and a sort of standard knowledge base, but he could answer some general questions, and if you asked him anything outside of that, he just didn't really know, right? But that was a starting point for us, and we wanted to have him engage incoming freshmen to basically be a resource for information if you're getting around or you need to know things about what are going on around campus. So in tandem with that, we had a little bit of RPA going on, robotic process automation, right? And that was with the academic intervention population. So when academic intervention came under my umbrella, to give you an idea, think about, digital natives, students are supposed to complete this academic improvement plan, right? So this was a 16-page, printed off academic improvement plan that students had to fill out with one of those antiquated tools that was like in the first slide, like pen or pencil, right? They had to complete that, then they had to go back to the success coach, talk about the goals that they set. Most of the times those goals weren't what we call SMART goals. SMART goals, we want students to, have specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound goals, SMART, right? And most of them didn't qualify. So there was this whole process to even get students to a point to where they could set their goals, right? We moved that to a mobile compatible intake that allowed students to answer a series of questions on their phone, right? Digital natives. And that led them to a bank of SMART goals that were quality controlled with 2 follow-up action steps, and through RPA it automatically generated and sent them their academic improvement plan without actually anybody touching that, and it was quality controlled. Now, when we had the 16-page printed thing, the completion rate for those academic improvement plans was 27%. 1 year later, with the new mobile compatible one, the completion rate was 99%, right? That engagement led to the completion of more academic improvement plans, and 1 year later, academic intervention population, students who are failing, who have a GPA below 2.0, is reduced by 48%, right? That, for any institution, is significant, which means that when we find RPA, when we find solutions, and what we do is we have a little nerd, innovative environment. We have nerd storming sessions. So I encourage all of you to always, within your environments, create space for creative play. Because that's what we do. We get together in a room and we talk about stuff that's going on. We talk about weird technologies we've learned about, and we're like, wouldn't it be cool if, right? And that's how we start. And we've got a great ITS development team that works with Chris and Dan and others, and I feel bad because we have these spaces where we come up with creative stuff and we're like, hey guys, what if, can you build this now, right? But that's how you innovate. And putting these things two together, a chat and an RPA, really is about leveraging. So Gus, of course, is a virtual assistant. He utilizes generative AI to serve all students, faculty, and staff at Georgia Southern. Now notice, I said not just students, right? So Gus actually, so if I need to check my leave balance, I can ask Gus. And this is one of those important things. I like that concept of the Gus bot or the Druid bot being the conductor, connecting to different things. Because now we have a chatbot that he's just not going off of an FAQ, right? Gus can authenticate a user. Gus knows who I am. Gus has access to our ERP. Gus has access to our SIS, our student information system, right? So Gus can tell an individual student what holds they have, right? Gus can tell individual students, we just did a proof of concept outside of Gus. We test things outside, and then we go to ITS and we say, hey, can we make this a flow, right? We just had Gus successfully academically advise a student athlete, right? So Gus is able to provide information, answers, questions. He can resolve issues, connect to resources, and more. So current service areas for Gus. In my role, I am responsible for the entire student life cycle. So it's prospective students all the way through to hopefully donating alums, right? And so Gus is now being integrated into that entire life cycle from prospective students. We actually just went live on admissions, and I have to tell you, within a day, it became our #1 engagement with Gus. Now, I don't have today's number, but I can tell you this is antiquated. Gus has had over 35,000 conversations, right, with people outside the university, prospective students, but with current students, with faculty, with staff. He's the connector, and he's accessible through a platform that is intuitive to our student population and increasingly our employee population as we have more millennials and Gen Zs coming into the workforce, right? And we use him for campaigns. He does outgoing communications, but he also, of course, handles the incoming. And we launch him on different sites. So our next rollout for him that we have planned out is for him to start specializing in providing information and workflows for our graduate students, because we know that going out to 2030, the growth in enrollment in higher education is actually in graduate programs, not undergraduate programs, helping those students that have some credit, no degree to get to completion. So I talked about comprehensive, coordinated, differentiated care. So I know we're basically out of time, but I wanted to let you know, so we have a predictive and prescriptive analytic model where we look at, it's 40 some odd attributes that give us a good indication about a student's risk for attrition, the likelihood of a student not being successful in their program of study. And it can be their incoming test scores, compounded with a combination of classes that they might be in, where those two classes together are like a toxic combination, because we monitor drop, withdrawal, and fail rates for those classes. But long story short, we use those analytics and we are plugging it in to where, rather than this student's not doing well in this class, I'm a faculty member, I'm issuing an early alert, that's going to the advisor's gonna call the student, they're gonna try to figure out what the student, do they need to go talk to the instructor, do they need to do extra credit? No, we're not doing that anymore. We're automating this process to where we are, through prescriptive and predictive analytics, going to be able to identify problems and challenges for students at the earliest possible point for intervention. And we are also going to be able to use that data through AI. We're going to be able to use that data to identify what prescriptions are the most effective to help those students to be successful, right? So again, this is a tool that, Chris is saying that, strategic, it's a strategic tool. And every institution in higher education should be looking at how they can leverage this tool to meet specific students' needs, so that for them as digital natives, it's that personalized, seamless, intuitive, data-informed experience. And then we also have something that we're doing with our learning management system that's going to actually start incorporating some more things that are about actual student learning outcomes. So we're excited about that too. So this advancement here so this shocked me. We have 3 different conversations. I'm not going to focus on the first 2. The first one's just about, how do you drop a class, right? Very sort of transactional chatbot engagement right there. The second one, though, is about an individual student that needed to know something about their specific assigned advisor. Of course, that's, it's able to authenticate the student. It knows, it provides specific information to that student. This third one is amazing. And this is what we talk about, that the evolution of our learning and the evolution of this type of service. So this was a real conversation. You don't see the previous part. It's talking, there was a parent that had reached out, and GusBot basically let the parent know that, yes, they could check in late with one of our resident assistants at the dorms because their freshman was going to be late. And it was because my husband had a little accident fixing the lawnmower last night, so we were just in the ER till late, didn't get much done. He's fine, severed some tendons in his fingers, and has to have surgery, and then they're moving the student in on Wednesday, day after the surgery. But look at Gus's response, right? Oh no, I'm so sorry to hear about the accident. I'm glad to hear that your husband is okay, but I can imagine how stressful and exhausted it must have been for both of you. Moving your daughter in on Wednesday must be adding to an already hectic schedule. If there's anything I can do to help provide information about Georgia Southern, please feel free to ask. Wishing your husband a successful surgery and smooth recovery. Thank you. I definitely feel even more emotional now, right? Think about that. This is a parent that is having a conversation with a chatbot, and she's feeling that emotional connection, that service, right? And so I think that we really are, I think we'll look back on this sort of thing and be like, yeah, this was kind of where this started, and it's exciting for us. Building that connection. I have to tell you, I do a lot of surveys to get feedback from faculty, staff, and students about what's important and how we're doing in those areas, right? So I do a lot of student feedback surveys. And I don't ask students to describe an experience. I ask them to describe how the experience makes them feel. Because here's the thing, you can go to an information session and your brain might retain some of the information.
You won't remember everything that was said, but you'll remember how you felt. And that's the key to whether it's a customer experience, whether it's an employee experience, whether it's the student experience. That's really what the key is. And so we have an obligation in the higher ed space to leverage the tools that are available for us to make sure that students have those experiences and ultimately that they end up being successful. So, thank you.
Any questions for Scott before we take a quick break? Yes.
Congratulations. I'm very impressed about your speech, really. I check if it is recorded because it's fantastic.
Oh gosh, there's always somebody that's going to test this. Yeah, public transportation is not huge. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, good. I have to tell you, I debated on whether I wanted to put Gus's contact info up there, but I was like, you know what, we'll give it. I have faith in the product. I will tell you, so I don't want to spill too many beans because we do have some other higher ed institutions here, and everybody's going to steal everything that we do. So, we have so we're integrating a new campus tour that's actually VR. So through Meta Quest, students will actually be able to tour our campus from anywhere. And a part of that is we are creating points of interest around our campuses so that if students want to know, it's like, where can I go for Taco Tuesday, right? It'll give them the options. So it's about as we build out that student experience and we get those more information and data points, we can integrate that into that. Yeah.
Yes.
How is the tool learning? Learning as ask questions.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great question. It's a combination, right? So we still have a knowledge base that we maintain for very specific Georgia Southern information, and when there's a strange event. So like for example, we had a hurricane, right? Campus was closed. There was a lot of information that needed to be inputted so that students, if they were asking Gus about the campus being closed, resources on campus because a lot of folks were out of power, what to do because, basically half the state didn't have internet, like how do I, so it's like everybody's they're not going to complete their coursework on their phone yet. But so there's the knowledge-based portion. It is informed by all the conversational AI tools that Druid has. We do have a little bit of a ring around the space though, because the fact is Gus can authenticate you as a student, and so there's a certain wall that has to exist so that some information doesn't, is compartmentalized in a way that it doesn't get shared for security purposes. But we are constantly evolving and updating that knowledge base. And I know that we also are, Dan had mentioned, some of our ITS people being a little apprehensive about Gus crawling our websites. They have gotten to a space to where now Gus is going to be doing that because there are some pages that we know it's good for Gus to glean information from. I see Dan. Do you want to add any other?
Data
Oh, he's
is
got.
not shared between bots. So it's just for him. It's not going into a consolidated generative AI model feeded with data from multiple universities. Each bot has his data isolated. From security perspective, the university holds the entire conversation transcripts. The processing power is in the cloud managed by Druid, but the entire data is just in transit and it's at rest and stored by the university. And another university, it's loading the bot with their own content, and again, data isolated.